Thank you so much, Peter. So my name is Reuben Herzl. I started a production company that produces videos for nonprofits almost exclusively a little over 5 years ago. Here are some of my core team members, Kimmy and I. Kimmy's on the left and I in the green hat, and Aaron to my left there sitting. And I just wanted to first acknowledge, well, Kimmy's right there actually, she's waving hello right there. A lot of the work that I'm going to share with you guys today would not have been possible without this team, and I just want to be sure to note that, because this is a collaborative effort. It not only takes great stories and great clients and great subject matter, but it takes a team, so thank you. I was actually going to start off with a short clip from an interview that I shot actually quite recently of a lawyer, Cindy Shin. She's a lawyer representing a bunch of folks who can't afford legal services on behalf of the Legal Aid Foundation in Los Angeles. And here she has some really encouraging words I thought you'd like to hear. And she represents a woman named Ilian Tamer in Los Angeles who is unfortunately in proceedings to defend herself from being unlawfully evicted from her apartment along with her children. So I'll just play that for you guys. Where did this confidence come from? Where did you learn this?
Oh, confidence.
No, I mean,
you're assuming I have confidence.
Okay, courage. Let's just say courage. She sees you, Ilian sees you as this angel, right? With courage and facts. I know you don't see yourself like that. And I don't see myself we never see ourselves like that. But where does that come from? What is that?
That's interesting, because sometimes when you're fighting for yourself, you're less bold and courageous. But if you're having to defend somebody, somehow you find the courage in yourself to appear stronger than you are, to advocate for a cause because you don't want them to suffer. And I'm sorry I'm getting emotional, but I had another client and we cried through trial together because their story becomes mine. And it's very emotional. A lot of people have this very shallow understanding. If a tenant is here and there was an unlawful detainer action filed against them, they must have done something wrong. But that's a very shallow understanding, because if you lift up the covers and see what's going on underneath it, the story is so much more complicated, deeper. And to uncover that and to show that to the world and present it, that's half the battle, whether it's in front of the jurors or in front of the court, the judge, or getting opposing counsel if they are reasonable to understand what's really going on. That's where you get the courage, because you have to do this. You have to perform. You were called to perform and be like a knight. You are called to defend them. That's my role. So to competently do my job, I have to have courage. There's no other option.
So whenever I hear Cindy's words, I can't help but feel some of that emotion. And so it makes me choke up just even watching it. And so the main question, one of the questions that came up in the description, part of the reason why you're here might be to help answer this question: how might we produce content that respects and acknowledges participants with dignity and empathy? And I stumbled a little bit with the word empathy, because you ask anybody, what does empathy mean? And they'll give you something that is more proximate to sympathy or compassion or all these different kinds of terms. And so I wanted to really just investigate, first of all, what does it actually mean to be compassionate? What is the word? Why start here? You have to first be compassionate with yourself. That is where you want to start fundamentally, because in doing this work, in doing interviews after interviews, telling these stories, you're going to stumble, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to hurt people's feelings, because that's just part of the process. Compassion literally means to suffer with, which is kind of an interesting concept, right? To suffer with, or to be in a state of mind that wishes well explicitly to somebody, it in itself can be a source of goodwill and well-being in general. So when you look at it in opposition, though, to empathy, you have to really understand that empathy is more about mirroring somebody else's emotions in your mind or in your heart, right? Whereas compassion has a kind of attitude or an approach to somebody else's emotions. So to suffer with or to go towards somebody's suffering is part of what makes compassion different than empathy. With empathy, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I just think it's interesting to know the difference between what is known as cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is what really makes a good poker player. You're able to know what the other person is thinking and potentially make a good bet on what their cards are. It's great for sociopaths, right? Emotional empathy is much more automatic. It's something that makes a good spouse. Good poker player, good spouse, right? And it's not something that it's something you can train to do better. You can do both better, but I thought that distinction was interesting. And with compassion, I thought it was kind of confusing that it's suffering with, and it's always suffering. And I think as a filmmaker and a storyteller, it's also important to not forget that sympathetic joy, as opposed to just sympathetic pity or sympathetic feeling, should not be left out. And so I wanted to introduce you to a concept that is fundamental to all these different types of words. So I'll have Orland Bishop introduce it. He does it much better than I ever could.
Sawubona is one of those primal words when people were still able to really see each other. In fact, the word says, "we see you." So it's not a single I person. That my eyes are connected to a dimension of reality we call ancestors. So my seeing includes my ancestors. My seeing also includes the divinities that are part of the celestial spheres of reality. So Sawubona says, "we see you." And the response is, "Yebo Sawubona," yes, we see you too. Because it's a dialogue. Seeing is a dialogue. It establishes you as a witness to some phenomena that can also be a witness to your own presence. But when two human beings meet in this gesture of Sawubona, the acknowledgement is we see each other. That becomes an agreement because we're obligated from that point to affirm the reality that seeing has empowered us to investigate our mutual potentials for life. So it invites us to communicate. Why are we, if we're seeing each other, why are we here at the same time? What is this moment of time given us to be able to do? So it's an invitation to participate in each other's life. Seeing Sawubona also obligates a person to give to each other what's needed for that moment of life to be enhanced.
So Sawubona actually comes from Zulu, meaning I see you, but I really liked the way in which he describes the sort of ancestral meaning or inheritance of the word Sawubona, where it's less I see you and more about we see you. So if I was to say to you all Sawubona, you would say back to me, Yabo Sawubona. So, Sawubona, I see you too. So, to get into the first case study, I want to introduce you guys to an organization that was founded in Los Angeles, 1975, called then the Korean Youth Center. And it was a community organization which was really focused on providing educational and youth services for Korean immigrants. And between 1976 and 1980, Koreans actually made up the third largest immigrant group to the United States, behind Mexico and the Philippines. But something changed in 1992. The riots in Los Angeles changed the relationship of the Korean immigrants living in Los Angeles and the larger community at large. So it evolved into what is now Koreatown Youth and Community Center, but there was a couple problems that they sort of spoke to me about. First of all, Koreatown, they don't only serve folks in Koreatown, they serve folks throughout Los Angeles. There's a lot of different areas that they provide services for. It's not just for the youth. They serve elderly folks, parents, lots of different folks from different backgrounds. And it's not just a community center. They have permanent supportive housing, they have mental health services, they plant trees to beautify the whole neighborhood in Koreatown. And it's also not just for Koreans. Actually, the folks who make up most of the immigrant populations in Koreatown are from South America, so they're from Mexico, they're from Latin American countries. And they wanted me to create a promotional video for their agency, but I had to do it in 30 seconds. And it was going to be displayed at a Clippers game in the middle of a basketball game. And so how do you take this agency that has this outward-facing brand that is Koreatown Youth Community Center, and how do you do it for an audience that is more Latino and just more diverse than just Koreatown? So I decided to interview a bunch of key employees within the organization, and I started with the executive director. This is Jung Ho. He's been the executive director since 1999, and he's incredibly shy, hates cameras, and never wants to participate in interviews if he can help it. And so how do we take this concept of Sawubona and introduce it into a project like this? How do I use that concept in order to represent KYCC for the people that it actually serves, or include everyone that it serves? And also, how do I use it, how do I create something that acknowledges Sawubona to even Jung Ho here? So you'll see there on the bottom of his seat there's a little package there, and in it, a can of pineapple Fanta, which he loves and is disgusting. It's just absolutely disgusting. I don't know where he got a taste for it, but I managed to find the can, and I gifted it to him on that day that he was so trepidatious to actually participate. And to him, or at least to me, it kind of symbolized this physical manifestation of Sawubona. I see you, Jung Ho. So to extend that concept of Sawubona, I even had a little camera set up here with instead of a teleprompter, instead of words, it was my face that was looking directly into his eyes while he's being interviewed. This is a common technique in a lot of film productions, but to him, it felt like he was able to look into me instead of into a camera, which I thought was really important of reinforcing this concept of Sawubona. And so do that, a dozen times, more than that, and take the little snippets that are valuable to representing the agency as a whole, and put it in the context of a stadium. You have this one chance, a captive audience, big speakers, and this is how it played out.
You see, I'm not Korean. I don't know if you noticed.
Whenever I go into KYCC, it really feels like a small village to me.
We try to help a family as a whole.
Our services are open to anyone.
We help thousands of families file their tax returns each year.
Environmental services, low-income housing.
When I plant a tree, I put a lot of love into it.
I'm running out of fingers to say what KYCC does.
Oh, we change people's lives here.
Sorry about my mischievous mouse. So one of the other questions that was in the program was, how do you address the inherent imbalance between the nonprofit organization and the individual storyteller? And for this, I wanted to show you guys a video that I also produced for the Koreatown Youth and Community Center that we called Beyond a Home. It was part of a small fundraiser get-together, really focused on highlighting this permanent supportive housing project that KYCC is responsible for. They have community services on the ground floor, classrooms, educational services, events, just tons of things going on the ground floor, and then a bunch of permanent supportive housing above. And so part of the process for me was essentially to camp out, right? In order to get comfortable with the subjects that I was capturing on video, I got to know the residents. I got to, help carry, bags of donated food and gifts during the holidays, and break bread together. That was a really important part of the process so that I got to actually know them. And so when it came time to making the videos, it was a process of interviewing the specific family members of this family that we ended up working with. And of course, it was a long list of potential families. Not a lot of folks are willing to give their time, let alone to tell their story, which can be so sensitive in many cases. A lot of these folks have had a tough time. So I'll show you a clip of the longer form video that we ended up making. This is the first 2 minutes or so of the video. What would the present look like if Menlo wasn't here?
That's an interesting story.
I'm gonna be nice because it is so fun.
He's gonna be nice because it is so fun.
My son was born on the day that she died. So God gave me a blessing and a reason to celebrate that day. And that's why I looked to say, okay, God, Mama, I know if you was here, you would tell me don't feel sad. But just missing her being here, holidays and stuff makes it hard. We had a home in South Central LA for well over 30 years. And when she passed, it kind of took me into a financial crisis. I got caught up in that modified loan situation, and that's how I became homeless. I was on a spiral of total depression. I shut everything out, everybody out, didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to talk to nobody. I was really on a bad spiral and didn't realize it. And one person said, I see it after you lost your mother. I went through being in a shelter with my kids, and I'm thankful for where they placed us. I couldn't have asked for nothing better. Some know me as Sharon Brown. I currently am a resident of Menlo Family Apartments.
So the unfortunate part of this whole process, or not unfortunate, it's just the nature of it, is that any film or any story that you put out there is made at least 3 times. Once when you're writing the script or planning to actually do the thing, and again when you're producing it, when you're shooting it, interviewing, asking the questions, and a 3rd time when you're editing. And by that very process, the whole context changes it. So take that video and then put it in a new context. You have to appreciate who the audience is again, right? So a lot of folks would ask, well, why not just capture everything? Why can't we just have the cameras rolling all the time, right? Well, our attention span is not so good at seeing reality as it unfolds, and who knows who would remember what. So this might seem like a strange time to ask this question when we're talking about empathy and compassion, but it is important when you're putting the stories together at the end. What is truth? And so this is from 1961, a documentary filmmaker. He says, how do we dare speak of a truth that has been chosen, edited, provoked, oriented, deformed? Where is truth? We've only provided a few pieces of a puzzle that is missing most of its parts. Thus, each viewer reconstructs a whole as a function of their own projections and identifications. Our characters are perceived globally by means of mere fragments of themselves. This is something you have to think about whenever you're going through those three stages of telling a story. Our job as storytellers is to create fables out of fragments. And so, who here is familiar with the 5 protective factors for child abuse? Can anyone raise their hand? Oh, got like 2 folks. So there's a number of factors that, or red flags or things that you want to make sure within a family unit that are present in order to make sure that child abuse is not occurring. You know, obviously, if you live in a stressful home, or if you have you don't have the network or support network of family or friends or things like that, or if you don't speak the language, there's lots of things that can make it hard to be a child in a stressful home. So one of the things that that KYCC wanted to help promote was the fact that they had clinical services in all these different languages for immigrant folks living in Koreatown and Los Angeles. And so the challenge was, how do we make a 60-second promotional piece that would run on local television channels in their native languages? How do you make something that is universal, right? Something that folks can just watch and there's no subtitles, they can just sort of see themselves in the storytelling. There's no interviews, right? We selected a family that was connected to KYCC to follow for a couple days. And so I kind of moved in, and except I didn't have a bed, I just, was there a lot. And this is a clip.
那好背，妈妈。
好啊，好啊，来。
好背。那。他们这样。妹妹他们出来。
1、2，加油！
1、2、3。
好了。来吧，来，来捶后背，捶后背，这里，拿这样捶，不是挠，对，这里，哎，哟西，哎，对，这样捏拳头，这样，对，2只手，哎，真棒。 对，就这样。对。
这样吗？
对。对呀。
这样吗，妹？
好。
这样。
好，都行。
都行吗？
都行。
我这里。
好。
你干什么？我不想看。
你不能看，我放下。
So the story that emerged was the relationship between Mrs. Sun and her daughter. She has 2 other kids, a husband who's unemployed. She sells AstroTurf full-time, And I don't speak, I can speak very little Chinese, if at all. And it was an interesting challenge just to come up with this one story. So the promotional video essentially took those days in which I was living with them, capturing all of these really intimate moments, and thinking about how to repackage that. So, but let me just go back one second to this question of dignity, right? Having me, a complete stranger, just sort of step into their lives, right, for a couple of days, that can be very invasive. And I did have a little bit of time to kind of get to know them and to sort of build that trust, but KYCC paid them. they got compensated to participate in this storytelling. And that is a totally fair way to treat, you know, the folks that are contributing their stories. This was the promo this is the promo as it started out, and it played in multiple languages. Well, you'll see, there's like one line at the end that got translated into multiple languages, but this is it.
Okay, let me change a diaper for you. Okay?
Okay.
No! 你看，不要这样子 ，OK? No! So silly!
So the message was, you know, take care of yourself too, which is one of the key sort of preventative messages for you know, eventually in the big picture to help, you know, reduce child abuse, especially of immigrant families living in Koreatown. So it's worth asking, you know, who are we talking about here? Labels are important, and in some cases they can be considered collaborators, subjects, participants, partners. But in my case, when I think of them, you know, these fables out of fragments, I think it's within the practice or the lingo of filmmaking to call them characters. And I'm not sure how I feel about that exactly, but it is another thing to think about. Another question that was baked into my talk was about engagement, right? How might the story production process help build community and galvanize a culture of service? That last part is not in the description, but you'll see what I mean by that. In this story, I would say maybe 5 or 6 mother support groups who were being each other's support group and also helping to prevent drug use within their community. So they had a cohort of different groups of mothers throughout Koreatown, and this is a short clip of one of them. I might have to cut it short a little bit, but you'll get a taste for it at least.
El único miedo que yo tengo para mis hijos es dejarlos solos, que me deporten para México. Para mis hijos espero ser una guía y que algún día ellos sepan valer nuestros derechos, que aunque seamos inmigrantes, aunque ellos sean hijos de inmigrantes, tengamos un derecho.
Cuando nos enfermamos, mi esposo y mis 4 nietos, estábamos los 6 enfermos de COVID. Mi esposo estaba grave. En este programa yo pude encontrar los recursos, tanto alimenticios como otros recursos.
Por la cuarentena entramos a una depresión bien así, que no podían ni salir y todos, y los niños no podían salir ni a la escuela. Me gustó este programa y por eso estoy decidida a participar.
Tuve que meterme a clases de inglés, a clases de computación para poder apoyar a los niños.
Mi esposo se quedó sin trabajo. Nosotros somos responsables por 4 nietos. Hicimos un balance. ¿Quién ganaba más y quién podía sostener la casa? Eso está sobre mis espaldas, el sacar adelante mi familia.
So, sorry, I have to keep moving forward. But that was one video that we made, one of 4. So there were 4 different groups of mothers that we told these stories about, these, you know, 3 or 4 different characters. And what was really interesting about engaging them in that process was that they had this excitement. It may not appear so in the video, but they had this excitement to kind of show the other groups of mothers what their videos were like, right? So it's like, here's my cohort of mothers, and here's how we're helping the community, and then kind of created this pride in their participation. So that was, sometimes it's the imbalance between the organization and the individual storyteller could go the other way. They feel like they're getting more out of it than the organization in displaying it in their content. This video let me see if this, okay. This video I produced on behalf of the California Community Foundation. And the folks who participated in this, there was a local clinic that provided services for folks in the community, but the infrastructure that they had grown to their organization around actually had to adapt during COVID, right? Instead of folks being able to come to them for testing services at this organization, they had to go out to them. And in the case of this story, they had to go out to homeless encampments, mostly along the 405 in Los Angeles. And their participation, they get a lot out of it, right, in participating in this production. And anybody who appears in the video had to sign a release form, right? This is really important to everything that I do with this work, is because that release form actually prompts this conversation about engagement and participation, and some folks actually end up getting more excited than you think. All right, so this gentleman here, getting his nose prodded, was actually, so he lives along the 405 freeway in a homeless encampment, and is jovial. He was more than excited to participate and to sign the release form. He actually saw us, he signed the release form, and we didn't see him for 20 minutes or something. He spent that time walking all the way back to his tent to spruce himself up, to make himself look really good, right? He put on the bling, he put on his glasses, because he looked very different right beforehand, but he was super excited to participate. And he's like, yeah, I can't wait till you show this. Actually, if he knew I was showing this video, he would probably be pretty proud. But I'll just show you this video to give you another sense of how participation extends beyond just the subjects that are participating.
Before the pandemic hit, we were just your local community clinic. People experiencing homelessness don't have access to a cell phone consistently, such that they can call for appointments or that we can reach them.
How's it going? We're testing for the coronavirus.
We can't treat these people through telemedicine, but we can actually just walk out to them, try to identify who they are, what their needs are, and treat them that way.
Right down there, Josephine, right there.
So the homeless population in Los Angeles is, at any given moment, over 66,000 folks. While Safer at Home might be one of our most effective tools against the pandemic, if you don't have a home to go to, it's sort of meaningless. I'm Danielle Wildcrest. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Brilliant Corners. As a response system, we have, in the midst of many things shutting down, actually scaled our response. We moved more people into housing in the early months of the pandemic than we had in the previous months.
At the moment that there was community transmission, we knew that we had to very quickly put resources in place to make sure that our most vulnerable, people experiencing homelessness, had access to the testing and isolation resources that we knew were critical to mitigating the spread of COVID. Brilliant Corners was really quickly able to move in and establish staffing, supplies. They were able to mobilize and move things within short turnaround times, hours or within days, which wouldn't have been possible with our county processes.
That's why we're back and kind of letting everyone know, so that you guys can take the proper safety measures.
Everyone has stepped up to the charge, even in uncertainty and sometimes in fear, with a willingness to really want to serve.
On some level, our team had an immense feeling of being unprepared for what was happening. And on another level, we had been preparing our whole careers to be able to really rise to the challenge.
The planning is one of the hardest parts, and that's done through DPH. And then the locations that we go to are scouted out by the outreach team. DPH was able to essentially organize all the testing supplies and make sure we have enough testing supplies. And then the outreach team has all the connections to each individual encampment and members already. The most important thing to highlight is that the education potentially could have prevented a larger spread. The fact that there weren't very sick individuals in this encampment and that there wasn't a bigger spread, I think is important.
Our work in this was to leverage our infrastructure around fiscal management. So the California Community Foundation was able to be nimble and make an initial investment of about $400,000, which allowed us to immediately work with the Department of Health Services to set up contracts for nurses and other kinds of medical staff who could go out with the outreach teams and actually do that work.
CCF was able to track what we were doing. They were following what our different response efforts were, and they were able to align funding in really critical ways. And we're able to bolster funding and resources to community-based partners and federally qualified health centers in order to provide the services that were required to meet this need.
I think that pandemic has highlighted what's always been true, which is our community health is interconnected with all of our neighbors. If we choose to prioritize moving forward a racial equity lens, a housing justice lens that makes sure that all of our neighbors have a safe, affordable place to live, we will not only be doing the more humane thing, but as a community, we'll be so much better prepared for whatever new challenge is ahead of us.
Okay, so to kind of summarize a couple of these things, I've kind of laid a bunch of potential strategies as to how to embark on this practice of compassionate storytelling. So we started off with Sawubona, right? This act of, or invitation of seeing each other through the project with KYCC. We talked about moving in, right? Embedding yourself within somebody else's situation so that you don't only get to see what is in that world, but you get to share in the experience itself and help out, right? There's this attitude of going towards alleviating somebody else's suffering, and so that's part of that practice. Compensation, right, with Mrs. Sun's family, that's totally valid. If your subject has to really go out of their way, right, to even get someplace or to, not be able to work that day or whatever, it's totally fine to think of that as a way of giving them dignity, right, and making sure that they are able to participate. Celebrating, right, with the Manos Unidas, that's the name of the mothers group in KYCC. They had these T-shirts, right, these matching T-shirts that they would wear, and they would be proud of themselves, in their different cohorts as mothers, and so they got a lot out of the experience. They were excited to participate. So that's a good example. And then the ride, right? If you're Brilliant Corners or you're the City of Los Angeles participating in that video with the California Community Foundation, they're more than happy to participate. And the folks who are on the ground being served, they had those relationships with the beneficiaries, and they just really enjoyed getting their nose swabbed on camera. And we got a lot of folks who were not interested at all, you can imagine, right? And so that's some folks just really enjoy the ride. So, but there's one last video I did want to share, which is kind of, I was reminded of, I wasn't sure who had asked the question, but somebody asked on the app, like, what was the most difficult story? Was it? Yeah, okay, yeah. So what was the most difficult story you had to tell? and this is actually one of them. But it's kind of like the crushed Fanta. It was difficult because it was incredibly challenging with the language barrier, with the sort of the gulf between our lived experiences, and even the inability to show her face on camera. That made it really difficult for that whole process of capturing her interview and getting her story out. This one is a story that I feel is a bit of a downer, but right afterwards, I promise, I'll show you one more thing that will bring us up a little bit.
LAFLA is one of the few legal aid organizations throughout the nation that has a specialized project dedicated to assisting Asian and Pacific Islanders. One of the largest barriers within the API community is language access. People can access services in Mandarin/Cantonese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Khmer. In 2021, we've received over 2,000 calls on our API hotlines, but being a team of only a few attorneys, we're obviously not able to take all of these cases. Lucy came to the US from Thailand because she wanted to study nursing in the US so that she could provide a better life for her daughter, who still was in Thailand. Later down the line, she met her husband. They fell in love after dating for a little bit and they got married. And at first, everything seemed okay with her.
ก็อยู่กันอย่างมีความสุขช่วงแรกนะคะก็ทำหน้าที่เป็นภรรยาของเขาทำอาหารให้เขาเตรียมอาหารให้เขาไปทำงาน
Things started to turn when she wanted to go back to school and what she originally came to the US to do. He would get extremely angry and violent at her because he wanted to control everything that she did. And eventually it became an extremely abusive situation where he would become physically violent with Lucy.
ก็ไปที่โรงเรียนก็ร้องไห้เพื่อนก็เลยมาทักว่าเป็นอะไรโรงเรียนก็เลยบอกว่าขอตำรวจให้ก็บอกว่าไม่ต้องขอเพราะว่าฉันรักผัวสามีฉันจะไม่อยากต้องการให้ตำรวจจับเขาไว้อาจารย์ที่โรงเรียนก็บอกไม่ได้นะที่นี่เขาไม่มีการตีกันนะอเมริกาไม่มีผัวตีเมียอะไรเงี้ยดีมากค่ะที่มีท่านทนายเบนทอนช่วยเหลือไม่งั้นก็ไม่รู้ว่าจะได้เจอลูกหรือเปล่า
It makes me really sad that she had to go through all this just to attain legal permanent resident status. There's a huge unmet need for people that are like Lucy. I just keep pushing through by continuing to do the best possible job that I can so that I think at least I know that I tried everything possible to get the best possible outcome.
ก็เหมือนกับว่าเรามาตกนรกในนี้เราเหมือนกับเราได้เกิดไหม
So why did Lucy do this, right? She didn't have to. But it takes me back to where we started, which was about compassion for oneself. And in talking to her about this, she just didn't want other people to suffer like her. So, like I said, it gets me down. I'm not sure how you guys feel, but it gets me down. I'll just close with a kind of sample of some of my other work mixed into some of the work that you guys just saw. And afterwards we can talk, or if you guys have questions, you're welcome to come up to the mics, but I'll just play this and that's it.
When you're a part of the fabric of Los Angeles, it really is the essence of your being.
1, 2, 3, we are at it.
Before the pandemic hit, we were just your local community clinic.
There was a need
We saw it and were able to respond on a small scale to a big problem that many people faced.
We have an amazing chance to turn this private property into an amazing public space.
I want my kids to have meaningful experiences in nature. I want them to know that nature is everywhere and connected to the nature of our whole planet.
How have I changed? I don't think anyone asked me that question 10 years or so. Because usually the question has to do with how's other things changed, right? How's community changed? How's KYCC changed? How have I changed? It gave me even more energy and passion that I chose the right career. And I'm here for the long haul because nothing's a quick fix here.
People say, why are you doing this? And my stock answer is, why not?
Thank you. So we have like 10 minutes if anybody had any questions. There's 2 mics on the left and right here if anyone wants to step up.